What up, y'all? Behind the door here, Brandon Brown, Jeremy Hiltz. Always excited to record and put this, what feels to us like really important content out to the world. Continue the conversations around, justice reform, recovery, and all things in between. And today I think we're going to talk about something that is really like a part of who Jeremy is and who I am, which is, getting people with lived experience into the spaces to, make a difference in our community with people coming out of incarceration, people dealing with substance use, mental health, and everything in between. And, Jeremy, we've talked a lot about the Recovery Connections of Maine and Recovery Housing of Maine in previous episodes. And I think we even might have mentioned this in some previous episodes about the structure of your organization and how many people that work for you have direct lived experience, not only with incarceration or reentry, but also with, substance use disorder and being on their own personal journey of recovery and being great role models for like what that looks like and trustworthy, relatable people for, some of the folks you're working with to go to. And I just, think it's important for listeners. How important is that? How integral is that in the creation of where Recovery Connections of Maine is right now to, being this really amazing program in our state? How important has it been for you historically to really embed into your staff people with that lived experience?
Well, I think it's, I have lived experience myself, so I think it's built on that in a lot of ways. Not everybody that works for us has that type of lived experience, but it's like one of these things where, I'm a business owner, right? And who's the most qualified to do the work? You know what I mean? That's what it comes down to, right? You got to take off the negative experiences and like what does a person offer to the community and to a business and or to as an employer. You always want to, our one of the hardest things that we have to deal with is staffing shortages across every industry, right? But when people are super qualified to do this work with lived experience, it's always helpful. You know what I mean? It always creates a level of connection that's a little bit easier for people with lived experience to gain. Yeah. When somebody's coming in for treatment and stuff like that.
Do you think, like, in the world of recovery specifically, like in the recovery community, in the recovery world, it seems to me at least that it's become a lot more normalized that people doing this work at a really high level are also people with that lived experience in recovery and in substance use disorder. And
so I just want to say this too, is that because we're talking about recovery from a medical clinical disorder, right? When you're talking, for me, my perspective, recovery, you use substances and was able to gain a diagnosis from that, right? Well, that doesn't necessarily need to be part of being hired at a job, right? It's like, what does this person bring to the table?
Like the total package, yeah.
Right. That is so I guess what I'm trying to say is in my mind, I look for people that are going to connect with our people the best. That's what makes a difference, right?
And so basically you're saying that like there's space for both, right? Like you said, not everybody that works for ARCOM has a history of substance use disorder.
Well, when I can really look at somebody as a person, it doesn't matter what you've done or where you've been or anything like that. Like, are you qualified to do this work?
So you're evaluating.
And more importantly, I guess the thing is that more often than not, the people with lived experience become the most qualified to build connections with people walking through the door. You know what I mean?
But you're not just pulling people in off the street that are coming to the door saying, "Hey, I want a job because like I've used drugs before."
No, you have to do the work. You have to go to school. You have to do all that stuff. There's obviously a process to getting involved into doing the work. Sometimes people think because I have lived experience, I am most qualified to do the work. And that's not always true either. Yeah. The people that are the most qualified to do the work are the people that gain an education to do the work, right?
And I think that's really the kind of the crux of this episode, right? Is like really starting a conversation for listeners about how like lived experience is very important, but it's different than expertise.
The other thing that I try to do too, Brennan, is create pathways for people to gain that experience
And that
right?
education.
Or, okay, it's a long road, but we can start you out here because you know what I mean. You have some motivation, right? But it's a long road to actually become qualified to do the work. You know what I mean?
And I think that's really important for people to hear. And so like in a lot of the work that I do is really kind of built on the idea that if we're going to talk about prison reform, if we're going to talk about justice reform, if we're going to talk about, just criminal legal reform in a very wide lens, that we have to talk about gaining the perspectives of people with lived experience who also have some expertise. And it's the same thing that you're talking about, that, when somebody comes in, you're not looking at just their experience. You're not looking at just their expertise. You're looking at them as a whole person and kind of the bigger picture of what do you offer my business and what do you offer the people in need that I serve. And I look at
and I guess this is the thing. This is why I say that, Brandon, is because it feels like it does the people that literally stand up Recovery Connections in Maine and Recovery Housing in Maine a disservice to say the reason why they're here is because of the lived experience. They're here because they're consummate professionals. You know what I'm saying? They do the work because they are the most qualified to do the work. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, and I think that's the most important part to capture, just the way you said it, because like one of the narratives you hear from people in prison and from people in reentry is that nobody's going to hire me because of the stain, right? The stain on my record, because of the crime that I committed or because of the crimes in total that I've committed. And one thing that we're always talking about is like, you have to view people as a whole person. And so if somebody goes to an interview and is completely discounted for the possibility of the job because they have a criminal record, really it's the person doing the interview that's doing themselves a disservice because they're not looking at the total picture of what that person brings to the table. And what I'm really encouraged about within the recovery community is that we've kind of done away in a lot of ways with that stigma of like, oh, if you have a past, if you have a past of substance abuse, or if you have a past of, committing crimes, then you can't do this work. And what we've moved to is if you have a past of committing crimes, but you're educated and you're experienced and you have like all of the tools necessary, we not only encourage you to apply, but if you're the right person for the job, we want you. They want to bring you on.
But that's unique, I think, in some ways to our you know what I mean? Like, I don't think that's that way across the board. I know that there's a lot of folks that still struggle with, especially around licensure and things like that. It becomes a little bit difficult. But just much like you and in some of the situations that you've gone through in your life, like you have to have the resolve to get to the other side of it, and it usually works out for you. But like, the most qualified people, I think, come with the determination, right? It's always about determination to get the thing done, right? Because I want to say this: I've probably had, I don't know, hundreds of conversations with people that say, I want to become a counselor. What can I do to do that? And I'll say, this is exactly what I did. This is how it's getting to be done.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and if you do this, I'll do this on the other side of it, but you got to take these steps.
Yeah.
There's only a handful of them that have actually followed through with that. And I've given that out. I've given that advice out. Hundreds of times probably, right?
But it's hard work, like you're saying, and sometimes it's like people want something without realizing just how much hard work and dedication is going into it.
And the point that I want to make there is that just because you have lived experience doesn't mean that you're entitled to anything.
Yeah.
Right, just because you have lived experience and I have lived experience and I run this program, it does a disservice to us to just say, okay, we're gonna pick whoever comes to the door. No, you got to do work, man. I did a lot of work. I had to work, fucking hard to get a spot. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like, we have to do the work, and that's like some of the most important thing that we can talk about is lived experience is wonderful, right? Like absolutely wonderful. It's a tool in the tool bag in a lot of ways, right? It's a very, very powerful tool in the tool bag, right? But what it boils down to is it is a tool in the tool bag, but there has to be other tools, right?
You can't screw something.
You can't just use a hammer all the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you got to have the screwdriver, and you got
we have to have education in our work. We don't flip hamburgers. You know what I mean? Like we work with people, and you have to understand that. We have to understand, like, our own life experience has to be dealt with before I can go and or at least like have a plan around it.
Yeah. And I think what I hear you say when you said the words lived experience is wonderful and it's powerful, that's something that I really want to highlight, because like, even if we are talking about flipping hamburgers, whatever it is that we're talking about, literally any job you can conceive of in the world, I think we should live in a society where lived experience is wonderful when people are able to display that through that experience they overcame, right? So I think about sitting in a job interview and explaining to somebody like, yeah, I did 13 years in prison, but the resilience that I established through that time to overcome all of the obstacles and barriers and the trauma and everything of prison really displays that I'm a person capable of doing what I put my mind.
Well, at the end of the day, you have the lived experience plus you have, but
no, exactly.
You have an education.
But I'm talking about even aside from that, like, let's say we're talking about a construction job,
right?
And somebody can sit in front of a construction employer and say like, hey, I have some experience in construction, and I also do have a criminal record and want to be upfront with you about that. For somebody to discount that person just because they have a criminal record is doing themselves a disservice, because you might actually be missing out on somebody who's ready to work just as hard for your organization as they worked to overcome their traumas and their incarceration and deal with everything that comes with that. So like, reframing for people in society that like, you shouldn't discount people and their potential just because they've been to prison or just because they've had issues with substances. Because if they overcame those, then that actually is a character. That's not a character flaw. That's a super positive trait that we should value.
And I think a lot of times, I've seen this sometimes where folks re-enter. And feel like I'm entitled to this thing because I had the lived experience. And I think it's something that we get caught up in, right? Because people, I can probably guarantee you, just like me, people look at you and go, it's Brandon gets to travel around, and he gets a flight down to Atlanta, and he gets to talking the thing, and and it's all candy canes and lollipops in Brandon's life, right? Seriously, right? And I can do that. I can do that because Brandon's doing it, but that's not always true. You know what I mean? Like it's rare. You know what I mean?
And what is true is that I think people can do it, but you already highlighted the part of it that matters the most is if they go through the steps of also educating themselves on whatever the thing is.
Well, I didn't start this particular like I've talked about it before. It's like there's a complete and utter grind that you have to go through to become a successful person, to use your lived experience. What I know about my lived experience is when I got out of prison, I was like everybody in my demographic, in my age group and all this stuff, the people I was in high school with, all this stuff, it's like I almost looked at it at levels, right? Like I'm starting here, like I'm rebuilding my life and I'm starting on a negative, right? Yeah. I have to work my ass off to get to even, and then to get ahead,
we got to work even harder.
It's not like we compare ourselves to people that are already didn't have the setback. You know what I mean? And then you don't understand. A lot of people don't understand that it's like you're comparing yourself to somebody, like, and it's okay to like think about it in this way. In my mind, it's like, how am I going to get to into that category, right? Well, I have to work twice as hard to get ahead. You know what I mean? That's just the way it works.
No, that's the truth of the matter. And I can tell you, for me, like, what really prompted my journey into educating myself about our system was like a recognition when I went to prison that like, man, this shit's not working, right? Like I'm seeing people that aren't getting better, and I'm seeing people that are just being more hurt by the system than they were before they came in. And it seems to be like the opposite of what we want. And that's what prompted me to want to educate myself about, our criminal legal system and about conflict and about how we can resolve conflict in a more healthy way. And so, but I didn't truly understand the nature of the system and all the harm that it does until I participated in that formal education process.
100%.
Right. And then I came home, and I've been very fortunate to be in certain spaces of, discussing what reform looks like and what the value of lived experience is. And one of the jobs that I have right now, we're trying to build a network of people with expertise and experience, right? So people who have educated themselves and have been embedded into advocacy and reform work, and using what you said, both their lived experience and their actual academic backgrounds in what works and what doesn't, to participate in reforming our system and changing it for the better. But what I still run into sometimes, especially in the reform space, is this idea that, like, because these people have been to prison or because these people have been on probation, that, like, they're not really authentic in their desire to change the system, that it's almost like selfish somehow. But what I'm starting to think about more and more is that we really have to prompt conversations in every space that talks about recovery and reform about the value of the combination of lived experience and expertise, which are two completely different things, right? But how can we expect lawyers and how can we expect judges and probation officers and other stakeholders without any lived experience to reform a system when they don't actually understand the effects and ramifications of the system on people? And so, like, this episode is really important because what you're talking about is so true. Just because you have lived experience doesn't mean that you're prepared to go in and make the system better, right? You have to pair that experience with the education. You have to pair that experience with the expertise, because then you can enter into a space and say, hey, from a theory perspective and from a clinical perspective and a medical perspective and all these other perspectives, the system is supposed to do A, B, and C, but from my personal experience, it's not. And so I know what's supposed to happen, and I can actually narrate for you why it didn't happen because I've educated myself and I have this level of expertise. But we unfortunately live in a world right now where we're so slow to catch up to valuing that combination that we still shut people with expertise and lived experience out of the spaces where they would be the most effective.
Right.
But what you've shown through Recovery Connections of Maine is that when you pull people in who are the prime candidates because they have that combination at a really high level, that it can be life-changing for the people that they're working with, right? You pull in these people, you have people working for you that have such amazing intelligence about what recovery looks like and what, positive mental health treatment and substance use treatment looks like, and can say, I know that also because it's what was absent during my experience. So I have the tool bag, a full tool bag. And then we have the criminal legal reform space that is just now inching forward into trying to bring people with the experience and expertise in to say, how could the system work better from what you saw and what you know and the tools you have in your tool bag? But, like, we have to normalize that, right? And even back to what I was saying earlier, we really got to normalize valuing people with character traits that we want to see in our businesses. And resilience is a great character trait, and dedication is a great character trait. So if somebody has been through the worst and experienced prison and experienced substance use, but has overcome that and has had the resilience and the dedication to learn about what it took to overcome that and what it takes for other people to overcome that, then those are the type of people that we should be looking for that will complement the space. And not that every space should only be those people, because you have people on your staff that don't have any of those experiences who are high-level experts that are saving people's lives. Mm-hmm. But they also benefit from the people with the lived experience, right? So if you create the community of diverse people and you actually encourage people to show that if you dedicate yourselves to becoming educated, not only about your experience, but about the field in general, then you actually bring some amazing value to the table that we can use and that can benefit the people that we work with. And that's what we got to normalize for people out here, is like not only inspire people to do that work that you're talking about, because if you've given that advice out hundreds of times and only 5 people had followed through with it, we got to talk about why that is too. So we got to inspire people to do the work and to dedicate themselves, but then we also have to inspire people in society to do away with the stigma of, oh, if you've committed a crime, you're not a good candidate. No, sometimes the best candidate is the person who had committed a crime.
And I think we have to encourage folks with lived experience to do the work.
Yeah.
And like really talk about the reality of like what that looks like, right? And you know, on my personal journey, man, the struggle that I had early on, you know, coming out of the system and stuff, like the path that I was on to get to where I'm at, you can't sacrifice. You can't change. I wouldn't change that for the world. That was like it was a hard time, but everything was simple. You know what I mean? Like you have a goal and you got to work towards that goal. And what is the lived experience that we're looking for? It's like that journey of overcoming is what really I'm looking for, right? When we talk about lived experience, it's like, yeah, we've been through this. Mm-hmm. A lot of people have been to prison and gotten out, but the lived experience really comes from really that part of the journey is like overcoming it and like going to school and getting a degree and like repairing relationships and staying out of the streets and not like and eating ramen when you know you could be doing other things. You know what I mean? Like those are that's the experience that is the human part of it, right?
We have something that happens too, and I've talked about this a lot over the years with, you know, men and women and young people inside of prison is like our consciousness gets so infiltrated by the social narratives about us that it almost causes us to give up hope. And you know, in my studies about narrative and about the power of a social narrative and a personal narrative, I've always tried to really like compel people to think about how you could tell your story that would actually attract somebody to you as opposed to repel them away from you. And I think that's one of the first things we really got to get people to start to think about is like, if I'm afraid to tell you that I went to prison and I go to a job interview and I leave that part out, it's probably inevitable that you're going to find out about it. And then it's going to seem like something that was misleading and it's going to affirm everything you think about people that's been to prison. But if instead I say, yeah, I've been to prison, but let me tell you why that's a positive story instead of a negative one, that's the first step into really creating people changing their hearts about what it means to go to prison and like what it means to be somebody with that stain on your record. And I really believe that the power of positive storytelling can create more opportunities than they'll take away from you. If you can actually go in and say like, here's all my cards on the table, but here's the house I built out of those cards. Right. And then the other thing that I'm just gonna tell you, this is, I laugh about it sometimes when I think about it, that when I was in prison and I was getting my education, I always had a dream of what I wanted to do, right? When people would say, what do you want to do with this degree? And I would have that dream that I want to do the work I'm doing now. I want to be in the reform space as an expert with the credentials that people can't discount just because I'm a criminal, right? And that was my dream. But I also always told people, but you know what? There's no work that's beneath me. And people always used to laugh at me and they thought that I was like just talking shit. They thought I was capping, right? But I would always say, I'll flip burgers, man, to pay my bills. And I promise you that I will be the best burger flipper that's ever existed because I just want to make people smile. And like, there's thousands of people that I've had this conversation with where I said, if I worked at the Burger King in Mill Creek in South Portland, Maine, people would come from all over the country to my Burger King because it'd be like, that dude made me happy when he was flipping my burgers. And for me, that's just, again, like the nature of positive storytelling, that it doesn't matter what I do for work. I could be a janitor, but I could still have a positive impact on people's life, grinding it away as a janitor, because I want to make people smile and I want to use my lived experience and my story to teach people something regardless of the work that I'm doing. And so like, that's why it's important, regardless of what the work is, what the job is, how much technical skill it requires, that we should always give people the opportunity.
I met some of the most talented men I've ever met in my life. It's in terms of artists or woodworkers and they're like just amazing, talented people in prison that like could contribute to society in a lot of positive ways. That like, it's a shame that like people feel like I can't do anything now that I've done my punishment. Now I can't do something that that's the thing is that we can absolutely can now, and I think like it does take a lot of conversations and more people like being vocal about the positive victories that they've had in their lives, like to talk about that, because it inspires the next guy, right? But like the next guy also has to understand the sacrifice that it took you to
100%.
get to where you're at, and you have to be willing to do the same thing the guy in front of you did. You know,
I'm laughing to myself because like I'm sitting here in this conversation and I'm thinking about all the, like what you just said, some of the most talented people that I ever met was in prison. And I'm thinking to myself like how a person could use their experience in prison to really sell themselves at a job interview. And I'm like, man, I've been out for a couple of years now, and I've had the privilege to like eat some really amazing food, right? And sometimes like every once in a while I'm like the weird type of person. I take a bite of something, I'm like, you know what I mean? Like I do a little dance. Food makes me so happy.
Yeah.
But then I also sit at home sometimes, and I remember the delicious meals I had when I was in prison that guys in the pod cooked with literally the shittiest fucking ingredients you could ever imagine. It's like ingredients that most people in society would turn their nose up at. I'm not eating that. What do you mean you put that in that? And I'm thinking to myself, like, just in the spirit of the conversation we're having, like, you know who I want working at the 5-star restaurant I went to? I want the dude who was in prison with a summer sausage, a bottle of jelly, and some stolen ingredients from the kitchen, who made a 5-star meal. I want him to work at that restaurant because I want to see what he could do with the best of the best. Yeah. And that's a story. I think about the power if somebody went in and could be like, listen, I'm going to bring these ingredients to you, and they're things that you would never eat in your life. And I'm going to make something. I want you to taste it. And when the person tastes that, they might say, I need you in that kitchen.
That's right.
Because if you can do that with some shit, what can you do with Kobe beef? I don't even know what the fuck Kobe beef is. I know it's delicious, and I want to see what the prison chef could do with some Kobe beef. I think about jailhouse lawyers. I think about guys that are spanking cases in prison with 2 legal books that were 20 years old. I want him in the law office.
100%.
So I think this is like such an important part of the conversation. It's taking like a couple little turns through this episode, but like you're 100% right. People from like our internal experience, we got to value hard work and dedication and education. And we have to get out of the belief that just our experience is enough. But we also got to get into the belief that, man, I can frame my story in a way that anybody would. I really firmly believe, bro, you put me in an interview, anybody will hire me to do anything. Because I'm going to say I've done a lot with a little. And so if I've done this with such little, and you're willing to hire me even to something I don't know about, and you're willing to give me a chance, exactly what you just said, like we can start you here because you don't have the skills yet to be here. But if you give me a chance to do a lot with a lot.
Well, if you're humble enough to learn.
Exactly.
Right? If
And that's
you're humble enough to do the work, you got to be humble. You can't just go, yeah, I'm entitled to this because I'm good at this. I still got to get the education on the other side of it, right? I still got to get, I still got to, master my craft to make it sellable.
Yeah, and you got to have the humility and you got to have the determination. And I think about a story that I tell often, when I'm doing like a public speaking thing or when I'm just telling my story to somebody. Like a part of my story that I tell often is like I was able to get my master's degree averaging 6 hours of internet time a week for the entirety of my master's degree. Imagine what I could have done if I had 60, right? Imagine how much more I would know and how much better I would be with theory and how much better my papers and my assignments would have been if I wasn't restricted to 6 hours of online time a week. So I can tell people like I did a lot with a little because I was determined and dedicated to be the person that I want to be and learn the person.
That's what it comes down to, though, Brandon. Is that like I think the understanding and accepting the position you're at when you get out of prison, whether the system's fucked up, yes, right? Like everything is stacked again. We have to really understand that everything is the cards are stacked against you. People are gonna discredit you. And it doesn't matter. But I have to push all that stuff aside, right? Yeah. I have to push it all aside and say like that's not gonna stop me. I have to do this, and I have to understand that like it's gonna take me twice as much work as the next guy.
Absolutely.
To get ahead. Like that is the reality of my situation. And if I don't do that, I got to go back to hell.
100%.
And for me, that's what it was for me. I don't want to go back to hell, man. So it's like, I'm willing to do twice the work because I sat in that cage, you know what I'm saying? And the reality is that every time I went to prison, I was guilty every time I went to prison, knowing that stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I need to take that personal accountability and then go, okay, I am behind the game.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's the third quarter and I'm down by 12. You know what I'm saying? and I have to work hard.
You got to tap in.
I got to go. I got to lock in and make something happen here.
It's interesting to hear you say that because, like, I think one thing that's worth highlighting is it might not be fair,
It's not fair.
but it's reality.
It's reality.
And I think that's something that oftentimes people become too resentful about.
And ain't no one gonna come. No one's coming to save us, Brandon.
Other than us.
No one's coming to save us, man. We have to do the work. Yeah. Each and every one of us, as an individual, has to do the work. No one is gonna hand us anything.
100%.
You know what I mean?
Man, I'm going to tell you a short story that's going to feel like a left turn at first, but I think it's important because it's bringing this up for me. I spent a whole semester pretty early on in my prison education experience. You know, I was like second year, maybe third year into my education while I was locked up. And I really couldn't tell you exactly why, but I spent a whole semester studying the Holocaust. Right? I took 3 classes one semester that were all all based on Holocaust and human rights or genocide. And I remember like some of the guys in the prison and even some of my teachers and my family were like, dude, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, that's the most morbid possible thing you could do in your life, is to spend 4 months only reading and learning about genocide. But I had this desire to do it because I recognized that, like, you know, the Holocaust presents for us the absolute best and worst of humanity. And I thought about it as like, I want to learn what people who are in concentration camps went through, and they did nothing wrong, right? Just for being born during the Holocaust, we like, you know, Jewish people were persecuted and experienced the worst treatment that you could ever imagine, right? Systematic death, being in the concentration camps, the worst. Like, you can't experience a hell worse than what these people experienced. And one of the most valuable lessons I learned during that semester of like really kind of like, I got into a kind of a dark place thinking about the evil that people are capable of. But one of the most important lessons that I learned is that even in the darkest holes, even in the worst possible conception of hell that you could think of, that people could tap in to their humanity and their resilience and create the world that they wanted despite their circumstances. And so I think about the books that I read, the memoirs of surviving the concentration camps, and I think about how, you know, Jewish people built community inside of a concentration camp, and it had to be secret and it had to be silent, and they couldn't display it for the people that were persecuting them, but they never gave up, right? And I think about the efforts that I read about for people to come together and plot how to escape the concentration camps, and how much hard work and vulnerability and danger it took to do that, but how their dedication didn't allow any other reality than to get out of this hell. And so I think about like our experience in prison and all the life lessons that I learned through those studies that we're talking about. Man, if somebody can do it who's being persecuted just for being Jewish, and if people can come together and say, this is not going to be easy and it's going to be risky and we're going to potentially lose our lives in the pursuit of freedom and happiness, but they still dedicated themselves to it, what can't we do? You know, and that was like such a powerful experience for me. And when I'm thinking about this conversation about like getting the skills and getting the education and making something of your life and being willing to work twice as hard to get to the same place that people are already at, the value of that, that's where I learned that. And that left such an important impression on me for the rest of my life after that, that I might have to work 2 times or even 10 times harder than the guy standing next to me because of my life experience, but that hard work and dedication is worth it because it can get me to the reality that I'm dreaming of.
Well, you become, when you do that, then you become more valuable than the guy that didn't have to work that hard. That's the lived experience, right?
Absolutely.
That's the experience that I'm looking for. You know what I'm saying? Not just that you went to prison. You know what I mean? Not just that you had used something. Like, because that is not the most important thing. The most important thing is how do we respond as human beings to this thing? You know what I'm saying?
And when I think about
because that's what inspires the connection,
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
Because like if you inspire hope, the connection is that like, okay, this is something that I can get behind.
There's a power in a story about overcoming your circumstances when your circumstances are really shitty.
Right.
And what I learned is that how easy would it be for somebody to give up during the Holocaust?
Yeah.
Like, how easy would it have been for people who hid Jewish people in their
A lot of people did do that.
A lot of people did
You know what I
that.
mean? Like it's
And And I look at the value of that, like when your circumstances seem desperate and hopeless, how valuable it is to fight anyway, and how much you learn about yourself and the world when you fight and when you overcome. And that's what I want people listening to this episode, and that's what I want our brothers and our sisters and our mothers and our fathers and our kids who experience incarceration to really, really understand, is that it's not fair and it's cruel and it's not the way that it should be, but only by overcoming it can you change it. And so I think about, those lessons I learned during that semester to study the Holocaust, and that's what has always resonated with me, is it's not going to be fair. And my life's not going to be fair because of the mistake that I made, but I also have to take responsibility for that. But I know that the system is rigged against me, and all I can do is wake up, stand up, and fight, right? And I have to fight to make the world and create the world that I want, knowing what I've been through, and I have to be willing to tell that story, but I can't just tell the story. It takes the hard work and the dedication to be able to effectively tell a story. And that's what you're talking about. You're talking about the value that the people at your organization bring because they recognize those things, that it might not be fair and I might have had the cards stacked against me, but I still did it and I still engaged in it and I worked hard at it. And that, to me, when I think about my life, is the thing that I'm most proud of, is that even when it felt the hardest, I became the strongest.
And pulled on the other side of it.
Had to. Absolutely had
And
to.
that's the connection that we really tried to hone in on. Is that like people I can get better. I can get well. I don't have to go back to prison. I can be a good dad, a mom. You know what I mean? And that's what people want to connect to. So,
and I think where this episode started, talking about the value of lived experience and expertise, I think where it's ending is actually just the value of hope, right? Like, you can only...
We can be in recovery, reentry, blah, blah, blah. We can put all these fucking things on the Holocaust, but we're all human beings, right? We're all trying to make it through this thing that we have going. Like, we are making it through this.
Yeah.
And that is really what we connect to, right? So you can take the labels off, the recovery, the this, the that, and say, this is a human being. I respect you, not because of the time that you did this, that, the other thing, but because of your heart and how you carry yourself and how you determined. And you know what I'm saying? Those are the things that we connect to. Yeah. I don't need to put a label on that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, it's a beautiful thing, man. It's been a cool conversation. I didn't anticipate that it was going to go some of the places that it did, but I think everything felt like it went exactly where it was supposed to go. And hopefully that translates for everybody that's listening. And just as always, want to end the episode by thanking you, for tuning in. I want to thank you, Jeremy, for just being my brother and being, on this journey with us of telling these stories and hopefully inspiring people with our experiences and the experiences of the people that we're lucky enough to have on the podcast. And, as always, just encourage you to download, encourage you to follow our social media, ask you to spread the message of something that you heard today was inspiring. Tell somebody about it, send them the link to the podcast, do whatever you can. That's really what we're here to do, right? Inspire people. And I hope that is what we're doing. So,
Word.
Absolutely.
Subscribe.